Welcome to the Boone County History and Culture Center's Meet the Author program. I'm David Weber, and our guest here today is Jill Orr, a Columbia author who has written several books that we will discuss. I'm looking forward to returning to normal, so on the third Saturday of the month at 10:30 a.m. we can meet in person at the History Center. Until then, we'll be doing a Zoom interview once a month. I'd like to thank Simmons Bank, our sponsor, and the staff of the History and Cultural Center for making this interview possible. If you have any suggestions of authors who you would like to see, please contact me. My address will be at the end of the video. Our goal is to present authors from mid-Missouri or any author who knows a lot about Missouri. Well, welcome, Jill. Thank you for making time to talk to us.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
So tell me, how did you become a writer?
Well, you know, it's funny. I actually went to journalism school at University of Missouri. I grew up in Chicago in the suburbs, and I moved to Columbia, you know, to go to college and specifically to go to journalism school. And, you know, obviously learning, you know, the trade of journalism is very different than writing books, you know, certainly fiction. So I kind of like to say that it was sort of a combination of my training as a journalist, learning how to write, learning the you know, basics of telling a story, giving information, and then just my general habit of always being a reader. I have always been a reader, and I honestly think that being a reader is probably one of the most important things anyone who wants to be a writer can do.
So Jill is the author of a 4-volume set called the Riley Ellison Mystery Series. So the first one, The Good Byline, was published in what, 2017, I believe?
That's correct.
And then The Bad Break, The Ugly Truth, and just this past summer, The Full Scoop. So that means you published four books in 4 years.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
What? Tell me. Well, could you tell me what is the arc across those 4 books?
Sure.
Like how many years and?
So I'll kind of describe the series just a little bit. So if anyone out there is listening hasn't read them, it might be helpful to kind of have an overview. The series features 24-year-old Riley Ellison, who, despite her young age, is kind of obsessed with obituaries. And she ends up, kind of the hook to the series is that she ends up getting drawn into solving crimes through the obituary column in the local newspaper of the small town in Virginia where she lives. So that's kind of like the general framework for the series. It is a mystery series, as you said. So the in each book, in each of the 4 books, there is a murder that Riley is tasked with investigating. She's an investigative journalist, and so she finds herself investigating a different death in each of the books. But the 4-book series has sort of an overarching mystery that is very personal to Riley herself. And so that mystery threads through all 4 books and is actually, it's the murder of her own grandfather, who was himself an obituary writer. And so the Full Scoop, which is the last book in the series, is actually Riley solving her own grandfather's murder.
And as you mentioned, it's set in what, Tuttle's Corner, Virginia?
Tuttle Corner, Virginia. Yep.
Yeah, which I think it is a rural southern town. One thing I noticed was some of your language. Oh, bless her heart was one expression you used several times. And then something you described as crooked as a barrel of fish hooks.
Yes.
And then is a Gobslam or to be Gobslam?
Gobsmacked, yeah.
Gobsmacked, yeah. So I think those are Southern expressions. I mean, they aren't that common.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the, you bring up an astute point about the language. That was one of the things that kind of led me to decide to set the books in Virginia. My in-laws actually live half the year in Virginia. The other half, they live here in Columbia, Missouri. But I spent some time out there visiting them, and I was actually in Virginia when I started writing the Goodbye line. And so I was just very inspired by the way people talk around there.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, the great colloquialisms and just, I don't know, I just thought it was fun use of language. And so that was part of the inspiration for setting the books in Virginia.
So I imagine that you've talked to many groups, not in the past year, I know, because of COVID, but before that. So what do people think about the making Riley a obituary writer? How did you come up with that idea?
So it's funny, the idea to write about a character who is obsessed with obituaries came from, probably not surprisingly, an obituary itself. I was wandering around on Facebook one day, and a friend of mine posted a link to an obituary, and her comment was, "This is the best obituary ever written." And I was just like, well, I obviously got to read this.
Yeah, that's quite a claim. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I clicked on the link, and it took me to a website called legacy.com, which is kind of like an obituary clearinghouse where, people can send the obituaries for their loved ones in from all over the place, and then they can reach a wider audience than just local newspapers. And anyway, the obituary in question was for a man named Harry Stamps, like postage stamp with an S at the end. And it was written by his daughter, which I thought was lovely. And it honestly may be one of the best obituaries ever written. It's it's just lovely, and it's personal, and it's not just like a dry accounting of this man's life. It really tells you who he was. And I found that very inspiring. I found that to be, kind of what we would all hope for, if all that's left after, we move on from, this plane is a few inches in the newspaper. It's nice that it would describe, our essence as opposed to just what we did.
Have people reacted to that? To the obituary? Do many people read obituaries?
Yes,
I do.
You do? Okay, so it seems that in every group that I talk to, I always have one or two obituary readers. And
is that right?
Yes, and I have had a few times, in fact, there have been people who are not just obituary enthusiasts, but they are collectors, and they will clip out obituaries and put them in scrapbooks and keep them. And I'm always so excited when I get to talk to someone like that.
So Riley is 24 when at the beginning, right? And she goes from a job as a librarian to this obituary writer. Did you have to learn about 24-year-olds, I guess the millennials? Because that sort of leads into your other book, actually.
Exactly, yeah. So, it's funny. I find myself really interested in that time of life, sort of the early 20s. It's such a time of growth, personal growth and development, and people are figuring out who they are and who they want to be, and doing all these internal negotiations about what it's going to take to get from here to there and the rest of your life, and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm very interested in that time of life. As for figuring out, how actual 24-year-olds speak and the things they're interested in and pop culture references and stuff like that, I mean, fortunately, there's Google and you can find out just about anything. And so I did,
Oh, really?
I did try to do
Yeah,
a fair bit of research on,
yeah,
today's
yeah,
24-year-olds.
yeah. No, and I noticed one technique you used was email and then voicemail, and then doesn't she sign up for like Match.com
Yes.
or
Yes.
something? Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, okay. So I was just going to describe. So in each of the books, I have my publisher and I call it kind of like the email interludes. And basically, it's a break from the action of the plot, and there are email conversations that Riley has. Like in the first book, it's with a personal romance concierge.
Oh, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's click.com because I wanted to make up my own company.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the second book, she actually has a millennial life coach, and she emails back and forth with this life coach. And then in the fourth book, she has a personal astrology coach. And so she gets a personalized horoscope, uh, readings throughout the book. And those are just so much fun to write. And hopefully they're fun for people to read too.
Which her mother signed her up for, I think. Or
Yes.
gave it as a gift or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so I noticed that typewriter on your desk there. So you didn't write your books on it, did you?
No. This is just pretty much an accessory. It was a gift from my mom and my stepdad. They found it in an antique shop and thought it looked like me, so they gifted it to me.
So how do you write, or what are your work habits? How did you manage to write these 4 books in 4 years?
So pretty much, I write. I write on a laptop. I use Microsoft Word. I'm not someone
Do you
who
write every day?
Mm-hmm.
Do you write 9 to 5 or whatever?
Yeah. So when I am working with a deadline, I will write every day. Pretty much, 9 to probably not 5, but probably 5 or 6 hours each day.
Yeah.
And then, if I'm not working on a deadline, I do still try to be pretty disciplined about it. I look at it like, going to the gym or any other kind of exercise. If you just have to make time for it, otherwise the day can get away from you, and it's pretty easy to put off.
Yeah. Do you love to write? I mean,
I do.
You enjoy getting into it? And how
I
about
love it.
How about do you have love of the language? I mean, do you get into different
I
words?
do. I think so. I mean, I like to think like for me, and I think this probably goes back to my journalism school education. I love the blank page. I like I mentioned earlier, I'm not someone who outlines. And so to me, there's something very exciting about opening a new document or a new chapter and just kind of seeing where the characters lead me. I just find it very fun, and it's always surprising, and really most of the time it feels like the characters are just doing and saying and living their lives, and I'm just kind of following them around, writing it all down.
So how much of this 4-part series did you know when you started? Or what did you know about these people?
Very little. I knew very little. At the start of each book, I decide who is going to be the murder victim. And then that's really all I start with. And how they died and who is the bad guy and how it's going to be revealed is all something that I discover as I write, which is not efficient. Let me just be clear. It definitely leads to a lot of rewriting and going back and having to fix things, but it's for better or worse, it's my process. But the one thing I did know about the series was I always knew how Riley's grandfather died. And so that was the one thing that I knew. So when it came time to write the full scoop, I kind of had that in my head.
Yeah. And what have you been surprised by its reception? Like who's a typical reader?
So I would say a typical reader for the Riley mysteries probably skews more towards women than men, although I do hear from a number of male readers as well. Um, I would say probably, let's say mid 30s to mid 70s. That's pretty broad. But
Yeah.
I do also hear from a number of younger readers. I love it. I'll hear from people who are my kids' age. My kids are 16 and 19, and their friends will read the books. And so I think that it kind of has a cross-generational appeal.
Interesting. So let's talk about your fifth book, I guess it is, which How Not to Be Old. And this came out in November, right? Just a month ago, I think.
Just came out,
and, yeah. And I know that People Magazine recently selected it as a top gift book of the year. So this I guess this would be a good holiday gift. On the back and in the book too, you mentioned 10 points to see whether you need this book, and I'm short on two of them. Like one, I've never seen TikTok, and then two, Saturday Night Live music is way past me, or I have no idea who the bands are, but the rest I'm doing okay. I noticed the what do you call it, the generational reference chart. This is good social science. So you must have done some research about it. I mean, how did you know these age cohorts, as we would call them?
Yeah. Well, you make it sound so much more intellectual than it actually was. I really just, I researched, what years born in and, the each generation was. And then as far as the characteristics of the generations, I really just kind of did that based on my own opinions. I mean, I don't think I can call it social science other than my own, opinions.
Yeah. So how did you, did you focus test this book? Like,
a little bit.
How about your children? Have they read it?
Yes.
Have they read
My
it?
children
Were
were
they
very helpful. Yes.
Were they?
They were very helpful. They gave me some insight into Generation Z, because that's the generation they belong to. And actually, there are some friends who work at the gym that I go to, and they're millennials. And so they provided a little focus group for me on a couple of questions I had. And yes, I would pretty much ask anyone in my life from the different generations, questions about their telephone habits or their, Google habits or Facebook habits or TikTok, and just try to get a little research done that way.
And what do you have? I think 19 steps or 19 different criteria, I guess I would call it.
And even 20.
The 20. So how did you get those? I mean, those are pretty clever, I guess I would say. How did you get them? I mean, did you just make those up?
I did. I mean, again, it was when I started to write this book, it was important to me. I knew I wanted it to be a humor book. So this is definitely not a serious how-to guide, although I do think there's useful information in there maybe. But I wanted to, one thing that was really important to me was that I wanted to make sure I wasn't just making fun of people who were older. And so I really genuinely, when I was thinking of the steps, tried to think of things that would be both useful and that we can all kind of laugh about. I mean, and so hopefully the tone of the book is not mean in any way or mean-spirited. And it was important to me that I kind of came at this from a compassionate thing, sense of like, we're all getting older, and we've got to do what we can to stay current.
No, and your sense of humor comes through too. Like one comment you made about cursive, I think you said something like that we will only remember cursive from historical documents and tattoos that say carpe diem on someone's back, or things like that, which I thought, so I appreciated that. What and I certainly agreed about cash, about what is it, Vimo?
Venmo.
Yeah, which I've heard. I mean, I don't use it. I don't know what it is really, but I use plastic all the time.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me when I see people at the
Counting out
grocery store
change.
counting out the change. Yes, like it's a lost art or something, you know. And then I was surprised about the environment, environmental concern. Is it a young person's issue again? I mean, because it was like that back in the 60s and 70s, as I remember.
You know, and that's a really fair point. I don't think the environment is strictly a young person's issue. I think it skews towards younger people, maybe who are more passionate or at least more vocal about it. But it's certainly, I mean, I know many an environmentalist who are baby boomers, certainly. But you know, if you're, you know, if I was sort of making broad brushstrokes about things, it seems that I also know a number of, you know, Generation X and baby boomers who don't feel the environmental threat is quite as immediate a threat as some of the millennials and Gen Z do.
Yeah. Huh. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, because it is their future, you know.
It is indeed.
Yeah. And then I appreciate another comment you made that I liked was about if a millennial goes to a party or meets a famous person, if they don't take a photo of it, did it really happen? Because it seems, you know, that they take a lot of photos, and I know that only an old person would say, "What are you going to do with all those photos?" You know?
That's
so,
right.
How did you come up with the idea of a humor gift book?
So my publisher and I had talked for years about wanting to do a humor book together, and we just kept, I don't know, we would think about different topics and ideas, and they had suggested at one point a book that was sort of on the topic of generational politics, but written from the perspective of someone in the, you know, millennial and Gen Z generation talking to older generations. And I said, that's a great idea, but obviously I can't write that book. I mean, I'm, you know, a 47-year-old woman. I can't write that book. So we kind of worked the topic around until we came up with this idea of, you know, it's kind of like along the ages of like, or along the lines of that old expression that says, you know, growing older is mandatory, but growing up is optional. That's kind of the idea behind this, is that it's, you know, how not to be old even if you are. So even if, you know, you've been around for a while, how to kind of update some of your attitudes and beliefs and, you know, stay relevant kind of thing. So once we hit on that idea, it went really quickly. I mean, I think I wrote this book in about 6 weeks.
Oh, is that right?
I had a lot to say.
Yeah, it was all in there, right? And then there's illustrations in this book too, I think, which go well with the script. Who did the illustrations?
So my publishers, they hired the artist. Her name is Kate Wong. It's right here on the book. And she is an artist out of, she lives in the Pacific Northwest. And my publisher had the connection with her, and they actually art directed the book. So I was able to communicate with her via email, and, you know, we could ask each other questions, but the main process of art directing the book was actually my editor speaking with Kate. And there were several pages that, you know, we didn't have any ideas for, and so we would throw it to Kate and say, hey, here's the text for, you know, this topic. What do you see? And then she would come up with these brilliant ideas. So it was really fun to get to work with an illustrator. It was my first time doing that. It was really neat.
So So what's your next project? Would it be more like, which would it be more like? The mystery series or?
It's a good question. I'm one of these writers, I just want to write it all. I mean, I want to write more fiction because I love writing fiction, and it's such an immersive experience, but I also really like writing humor. I like writing shorter things. I would love to do another illustrated project. So I'm actually working on both things at the same time. I don't have any firm news on what they'll be or when they'll be, but I'm definitely writing both fiction and nonfiction.
So do you ever write anything exclusively for online?
I used to have a blog, and it was called An Exercise in Narcissism. And it was a parenting column. And I would write personal essays on parenting, and that was great fun. And it's still up, and it's still actually, it still gets some traffic. It was really fun. A lot of those pieces ended up being published in Como Living magazine through the years. But I haven't been doing a whole lot of that just because I've been busy with, with the books. But I definitely like that kind of writing. So who knows?
So do you know a lot of writers in town? It seems to me for 125,000 or however how many we have, we seem to have a lot of notable writers.
Yeah, it's amazing actually in Columbia how many writers there are, and how many really good writers and kind of diverse, fiction, nonfiction. I am a part of a writers group, and there's 5 of us in the group, and just between the 5 of us, we're fiction, nonfiction, food writing, memoir, and poetry. So and so it's really neat to connect with other, writing is such a solitary occupation. So it's really nice to be able to connect with other people. And of course, Alex George, who is a novelist and owns Skylark Bookshop now, he is kind of does the Unbound Book Festival. So he's kind of brings a lot of people together that way, a lot of us writers here in Columbia together.
And I should have mentioned at the beginning that all these books are available at Skylark, and I think and online too, I know.
Yes.
Right. Have you gotten any response from this? I guess you've not spoken to any groups in person, have you, since in the past month?
Not in person, of course. But the response to the book, I'm so happy and excited to say, has been really good. I've been hearing from lots of people who say that they're laughing and they're buying it for 5 of their friends because it's just a nice gift, and it's a pretty low price. I think the book is like $14, and so that's a pretty good price point. So it's been a really good response. So that's encouraging. I've had 2 books now that have come out during the pandemic, which is not ideal. The Full Scoop, and it's obviously small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, but anyway, the People magazine mention, and some of the other mentions I've had from some online influencers have really helped sales of this book. So that's nice for me, nice for my publishers, and fingers crossed.
No, and I noticed, and we will post your website, but I noticed in your previous years you gave presentations in St. Louis, but also out west. There was a place I remember seeing. So you must work pretty hard to promote
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is a part of the modern author's job. You have to be a full participant in your marketing and promotion efforts with your publisher. I have a publicist who works, at the publishing company, and she's amazing, but she can only do so much. So authors are responsible for reaching out to stores and being available to do book clubs, in person or via Zoom. I've gone to a lot of writing conferences. I've been on panels. My theory is I basically go wherever I'm invited. So I've gone to book festivals, and it's fun. I enjoy it. I'm an extrovert, so for me, that kind of stuff is really fun.
So when you were a student in the journalism school, did you aspire to do this kind of writing, or what did you think you would do when you came to MU?
So when I came to MU, I didn't really know. I only knew that the only thing that I seemed to have any talent for at all was writing. I was definitely not someone who was going to work with numbers or science or medical stuff. Definitely don't have that kind of brain. So becoming a journalism major sounded to me more employable than becoming like an English major. And so I went the route of journalism, and I ended up focusing on advertising, which now I think they call Stratcom. And so I did go to work for an ad agency, and right after I graduated Mizzou, I worked for an ad agency in Kansas City, and that was fun. But then I ended up going back to school, and I got a master's degree in social work. And which was kind of a left turn. And I worked for the School of Medicine at Mizzou, actually, on a grant funded program, and I was a grant writer. So it's funny how still a writer. Always with the words.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview, Jill.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.